All right, now before we move on, guys, I want to jump through a quick change of names. All right, now when we started talking about the early alliances, we had the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance, right? Well, as the war moves on, more and more countries are going to join in this war. Some are going to join what we would call the Triple Entente, and some are going to join the Ally or the Triple Alliance, and then people in the Triple Alliance are going to switch sides. So it's going to get confusing. So let's really have a quick change of names, real quick. All right, so Britain, France, and Russia, when the war really gets going, begin calling themselves the Allies or the Allied Powers. So if you see the green on this map, these would be the Allies, the Allied Powers, formerly the Triple Entente. Now, if you look at Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, Bulgaria, they're kind of in the middle of Europe, so they, big surprise, start calling themselves the Central Powers. All right, so we're going to switch our kind of mindsets. No more Triple Entente, no more Triple Alliance. We're going to switch it to the Central Powers and the Allied Powers. Okay, so Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, yes, they jump in a little bit later. We're going to get to that here in a bit, but they call themselves the Central Powers. So as more and more nations join the war, it literally becomes, guys, a world war. So let's talk about the Battle of Tannenberg. Right now, look, I'm just jumping through battles in World War I just to kind of give you, I want to give you an overview of kind of, you know, the major battles and what was going on. This means that we're going to miss a lot of battles, all right? This is not military history. You know, you could spend an entire college class talking about nothing except World War I battles. But I'm going to jump around and talk about a few battles that I think are significant. One of the early battles was the Battle of Tannenberg. Now, remember, Germans thought that they could go into France, knock them out in 6 weeks, sweep right back around and fight Russia. That was the Schlieffen Plan, but here's the deal. In August, the same year Germans invaded Belgium, or the same month that Germans invaded Belgium, Russia surprises Germany by invading Germany before they were expected. Now remember, the Germans thought that the Russians would take a long time to mobilize because they were backwards, but here they come the very first month of the war, and they invade what we would call Prussia. All right, so there they go. All right, now, the Germans very quickly respond, and they very quickly, throw the might of the German military at Russia, and this is where you get what we call the Eastern Front of the war, because it's the East, right? So, but like I said, Russians, even though they had the element of surprise, they had poor communications, they had poor railroads. When we talk about the Russian Revolution in a couple days, we're going to talk about just how ill-prepared Russia was to fight in a world war. But anyway, so they really can't handle it. They get overwhelmed by the Germans, and the Germans give them a beatdown. All right, so the Germans defeat an entire Russian army at the Battle of Tannenberg, and then the Germans proceed to invade the Baltic states, which were part of Russia, and they proceed to push back into Poland. All right, so by 1915, the Central Powers, like I said, had pushed into the Baltic states and Poland, and 2 million people died by 1915. At the time of the Russian Revolution, Russians were losing about 1 million soldiers a year in the war, which shows you just how Russia is getting handled in World War I. Okay? So Russia tried to jump in with a sneak attack on Germany, but Germany very quickly fought back and pushed them back into Russia. Pause if you need to. All right, now, something is going to emerge that we're going to talk a little bit more about tomorrow, but it's called trench warfare, and this kind of warfare is not new during World War I, but it certainly gets kicked up to a notch that has never been kind of seen up to this point. So, really quickly, what the heck is trench warfare? Well, here's the deal. European militaries weren't really ready for the kind of fight that they got. Now, this is kind of interesting. I read a book a while back, guys. It was called To End All Wars. It was written by a journalist that turns out to be a pretty good historian, and he kind of brought up a lot of primary sources, and basically a lot of European leaders, when World War I broke out, like I said, they had in their minds that this war was going to be glorious. They literally thought they were going to charge across the battlefield on the back of a horse with a sword in hand and win the day. All right? Now you might be thinking, are they stupid? Do they not know machine guns exist? Yes, they do. But remember, Europeans kind of believe in this thing called quote-unquote gentlemanly warfare, and machine guns before World War I didn't really fit into gentlemanly warfare. Now, Europeans might use machine guns to frighten or, actually kill native people in Africa or China or things like that, but they didn't really consider using machine guns on other Europeans. But guys, World War I is going to change that. So, as you can imagine, the first couple battles, when you go charging into the on the battlefield, and the Germans open up with the machine guns, and you get mowed down, you're going to be like, oh crap, we can't do that. So what do? You dig down into the ground for cover from the machine guns. So armies dig trenches for cover in World War I to launch attacks from. Now, World War I wasn't the first time that trenches had happened, guys. They used trenches in the Civil War, but they weren't nearly as elaborate as these trenches. So, obviously, why are they digging down into trenches? I just told you. New weapons such as machine guns and howitzers, which are modern cannon, are going to make the death toll on the battlefield far more devastating. It gets to the point you're going to see where you can't get out of your trench or you're pretty much guaranteed to die. Alright, so the only safety that a soldier had on the battlefield was to get down in a big ditch or a trench. Now, this really starts to happen at what's called the First Battle of the Marne River, which is in September 1914. All right, so basically the Germans push pretty deep. Oh, here's our map, guys, and there's the Eastern Front. The Germans are going to push pretty deep through Belgium into France. Now, they thought they would catch the French completely off guard by invading through Belgium. They were wrong. They thought they could knock out the French in 6 weeks. They were wrong, because northeast of Paris, German forces actually meet a coalition of French and British soldiers. Now, how did the French and British get there so quickly? Interesting. Talk about a modern war, but French actually used automobiles, basically taxis, to drive their soldiers very rapidly to the front lines, drop them off so that they could meet the German forces. Now, another thing is, the French saw them coming because of this new thing called an airplane. Now, we'll get into aerial combat in another lesson, but basically the first airplanes in World War I were kind of used as spotting enemy soldiers. So you'd fly around, you would see where the enemy soldiers were, and then you would go land and tell everybody where the positions are. Well, the French saw them coming with airplanes, and taxis dropped them off. So like I said, talk about a modern mechanical war. So, at the Battle of the Marne, here you see, guys, the French joining and meeting the Germans, the French and the British. The Germans were forced to retreat, and both sides dig down into trenches. All right, now, like I said, why are they digging down into trenches? Because here come the machine guns. Once again, in another lesson, we're going to fully cover trench warfare, but this is how it all gets started. All right, now, you're not going to get out of your trench because you get mowed down. Guys, that's my best, machine gun noise. I'm sure I could do better if I really tried, but I'm not going to try. All right, so now the Schlieffen Plan obviously did not work, and Germany has to do what Otto von Bismarck tried to prevent through alliances. They're going to have to fight a two-front war. What that means is they have to fight a war on their western front and on their eastern front. Now think about what that means for Germany. They've got to split up their forces, right? If they could just fight a one-front war, they could take all of their forces and throw them at one side, but now they have to divide up and split their forces and watch their back at the same time they're watching their front. So, a very dangerous situation that Germany was trying to avoid. Pause if you need to. Here's a picture of a trench. All right, an early trench. This is before they got really elaborate. And guys, here's another picture of a trench. Like I said, here's the Germans that got the spikes on their helmets. But anyway, this is before they got really elaborate, all right? They're just basically ditches. You're going to see they're going to get far more, big. All right, now pause if you need to. Okay, now, something really weird, and it only happens once, happens on December 25th, Christmas Day, the first year of the war. Now, it really depends on what sources you read as to how this all went down. But in one part of the trench, French soldiers recalled seeing Germans hold up a sign that basically said, "You no shoot, we no shoot." Now, the French thought it was a trick, so they very much stayed in their trenches. But then they saw the Germans get out of their trench and start walking into the middle of the trenches in an area called No Man's Land. And the French are like, well, what the heck is this? So they get out of their trenches, and they walk towards the Germans very cautiously, but then they meet in the middle. What happens after that? Well, there was this unofficial ceasefire on Christmas Day. All right? What do? Well, enemy soldiers found a ball, or they made a ball, I can't remember, and they played soccer. They had a game. They socialized. They smoked cigarettes together. They traded tools. Some sources say that they got a whole bunch of junk together and made like a makeshift Christmas tree, all in the middle of a war. Isn't that crazy, guys? All right, now, the very next day they went back to fighting and killing each other. But, guys, it's really kind of interesting. For one day, soldiers kind of got together and stopped and celebrated Christmas and went back to their trenches and killed each other the next day. All right, now, a lot has been made about this in history. It didn't happen after that again. But, I mean, imagine... a lot of these soldiers are going to be the lower classes of Europe, right? The factory workers of Europe, okay? They all kind of realize very similar, they all kind of realize very quickly that they have a lot of similarities, and that the men in each other's trenches, even though they're quote-unquote enemies, they're not really different from each other, and they probably don't want to be there any more than the other guys do. All right, so kind of maybe a realization of the situation that they were in and how it sucks that they were fighting and dying for maybe a cause that they didn't really believe in now. Sure, they were pumped up 4 months ago, but a lot's happened in 4 months, and it's shown that war is not a glorious thing. Wait, guys, it's going to get even worse. Pause if you need to. All right, now, very last thing I'm going to talk about, guys, is some new allies. All right, now, like I said, the war is going to spread. It's not only going to add new powerful imperialistic countries are going to jump on board, but also, guys, you're going to see that British colonies in India, like Indian soldiers are going to fight for the British. French are going to have Algerian soldiers fight for the French. So Europeans are going to use their colonies as soldiers to fight for their causes. So let's talk about some new allies really quick. One of the early allies that jumped on was the Ottoman Empire, all right? Now, this is going to pretty much be the end of the Ottoman Empire after this war. But Turkey, which is pretty much right here, all right, where it says Ottoman Empire, Turkey joined the Central Powers in October 1914. Now, you might say, why on earth would the Ottoman Empire, like, jump in the war? Well, they're enemies with Russia, okay, because Russia's always been trying to take over their territory. They're enemies with Serbia, because a couple chapters back we talked about how Serbia broke away from the Ottoman Empire. So they're kind of, the enemies of the Allies. Now, another thing that happens early on in the war is Italy switches sides. If you look at a lot of history memes, you'll see a lot of memes about Italy changing sides. It happens in World War I, and it kind of happens at the end of World War II. But in 1915, Italy signs a secret treaty with the Allies. Now, go back about 3 or 4 chapters, guys. Remember when we talked about Italy unifying into one nation? And I told you that there were about 3 or 4 territories that Austria snatched up, all right, and basically did not get unified with Italy? Well, guess what? Great Britain goes to Italy and whispers in their ear and says, hey guys, if you switch sides and join us, then after the war, when we beat Austria-Hungary and we beat Germany, we'll give you all those Italian states that didn't get to unify when you guys became a country. So, the Allies promised to give Italy the Italian states that still belong to Austria. Now, you're going to see after World War I, when we sign the treaty, that is the opposite of what happens, and we actually are going to piss off Italy and have to fight them in World War II. But anyway, that got Italy to switch sides from Germany's side to the Allied power side, okay? So, once again, new allies. Now, how about this? Japan jumps in. Now, you might be, wait a second, record scratch, Japan? What the heck? Aren't they on the other side of the world? That's got nothing to do with them. Okay, well, you know what? Japan, guys, had a treaty with Great Britain before World War I broke out. And here's what Japan did. Now, we're talking about this right now in world history, but what's going on in Japan, and we'll cover this later, is Japan, ever since 1850, they opened trade with the United States, they have slowly been becoming a modern industrialized nation, and they're going to start doing, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, what all industrial nations do. They're going to start snatching up colonies. They invade Korea. They invade parts of China. They're becoming very powerful. So, when World War I breaks out, Great Britain says, hey, Japan, you got our back? And Japan says, sure. And what do? They snatch up German islands in the Pacific. Because remember, guys, Germany, like all European nations, have different colonies in the Pacific Ocean. So that's what they do. During World War I, they snatched up territories in the Pacific and some territories in China that belonged to Germany. All right? So now you've got the Ottoman Empire jumping in. You've got Italy switching sides. You've got Japan jumping in. But wait, there's more. Pause if you need to. All right, now, every single European nation kind of tried to sabotage the others. For instance, Germany went into Ireland and said, hey guys, F the British, they're making you fight in this war, right? And Germany tried to start a revolution in Ireland. Don't worry, it's going to happen. So Great Britain is going to do something very successful. You see, Great Britain's kind of worried about the Ottoman Empire because Great Britain controls the Suez Canal. Now, do you remember the Suez Canal in Egypt, right? The part where Egypt and France, or Great Britain, excuse me, kind of bought out Egypt's share and kind of took over Egypt, right? Well, they're trying to protect the Suez Canal, and the Ottoman Empire is very close to that. So here's what happens. The British send in a colonel named T.E. Lawrence to the Ottoman Empire. Now, there are people within the Ottoman Empire, a younger generation of people that don't want to be fighting in the war, and they definitely don't agree with the Germans. They'd rather side with the British. So, the British send in this Colonel T.E. Lawrence to unite these younger Arabic people and try to persuade them to overthrow the Ottoman Empire. And guess what, guys? That's exactly what happens towards the end of the war. All right, so T.E. Lawrence eventually becomes known as Lawrence of Arabia. They made a movie about it in the 1960s or 70s. Guys, I've tried to watch it a million times. It's like 3 hours long. It was the best picture, and I've never been able to make it through the entire movie. But anyway, great movie, I'm told. Anyway, so Lawrence was successful in causing a revolution, and that later on, that disrupts the Ottoman efforts later in the war. Okay? Pause if you need to. All right, now, guys, we're actually going to stop right there. Forget pause if you need to, okay? Tomorrow, we're going to pick up with more battles and how the war plays out. I hope you guys have a good night, and I'll talk to you later.